Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is a game that I've been playing for about as long as I can remember. I still remember seeing commercials for it on TV when I was little. I remember accidentally overwriting my big brother's PS2 saves for it, and subsequently getting my ass kicked. And I remember absolutely loving the small amount of story my 4-year-old self was skilled enough to play through so many times, as well as all the friends I made along the way: CJ, Big Smoke, Ryder, and Sweet. Running missions like 9s and AKs, home invasion, and tagging up turf alongside this classic quartet of Grove Street family's highest ranking members was a mesmerizing experience for me all those years ago. So I think it's pretty reasonable to say that I feel a whole lot of nostalgia for these characters. I'd like to believe there's a large number of people in San Andreas' fan base that feel this same nostalgia as well, considering the love that Ryder and Big Smoke have received over the years. But what I've discovered in recent years is that that love generally isn't shown to CJ's brother Sweet. If I can tell you a quick story, I remember a long time ago when I discovered that San Andreas had a speedrunning scene, I found my way into the Twitch chat of Hugo1, and at some point I recall him starting to talk shit about my boy Sweet. I put a message in the chat asking what his beef was with the character, and he went on to give quite a few reasons as to why he didn't like him. And a year or two later, he even made a video detailing everything he hates about him. At least this is how I remember it all going. It was several years ago after all, so I could be getting some of these details wrong, but that's the gist of how it all went. Anyway, after watching that video, I was convinced, and all the way up until a few months ago, I disliked Sweet for a lot of the same reasons as Hugo did. But then, I started working on a video detailing the story as well as many other aspects of San Andreas, and upon reviewing Sweet's character, I came to a new conclusion that maybe he doesn't deserve all the hate that he gets. Don't get me entirely wrong, I do agree that Sweet isn't the best character and definitely deserves to be criticized for a lot of the ways that he ran GSF and treated CJ. But there's also a few positive things that Sweet deserves credit for that I want to bring to light. In this video, I'm going to go through some of the things that I agree and disagree with the general consensus on in regards to Sweet. And then I'm going to explain what I believe is a misunderstood part of his character that gives so much more perspective and insight into why Sweet sees things the way that he does. In short, I believe Sweet Johnson gets way too much flack and hate. And while I don't think he should be totally admired, I definitely think he should be praised as a better character than he's been given credit for. And over the next however many minutes this video ends up being, I'm going to tell you why. Our first introduction to Sweet is at his and CJ's mother's funeral at the start of the game. In this cutscene, Sweet lashes out at our protagonist for being gone for the past 5 years, which probably isn't the reception you'd be looking for if you were reconnecting with your big brother at a parent's funeral. Regardless, after the subsequent bike ride to Grove Street, Sweet lets some more of his bitterness out as he essentially tells CJ that they don't need his help fixing up the Grove. A few missions later in tagging up turf, Sweet rips into CJ again as he mocks his word that he wants to help restore GSF, and goes on to assign him the grunt work of spraying some graffiti around the hood while he stays behind to play basketball with Big Smoke. But then, after the cutscene ends, Sweet changes up and shows a hint of remorse as he offers to go with CJ on this job, creating a rather wholesome exchange between the reunited brothers. I think it's pretty reasonable to say that following his mother's death, Sweet must have felt guilt believing he was the intended target, and was probably suffering from some form of PTSD upon witnessing this event. So when coupling that with the obvious resentment he felt towards CJ for abandoning his family after their brother Brian died, I'd say it becomes more understandable that Sweet would take out some of his emotion on his brother. Does it make him right to? Not necessarily, but I can understand where the anger was coming from. But from here on, whatever resentment Sweet had seemed to have dissolved as our brother would go on to give more and more praise to our protagonist without hesitation as CJ helped revive the Grove. But before GSF could be restored to its former glory, it had to have fallen from that glory in the first place. It's fair to say that under Sweet's leadership, Grove Street families became one of the weakest gangs in Los Santos and was on its way to falling completely before CJ came back into the picture. But I don't think it's fair to just blame Sweet for all of GSF's problems without considering how he and everyone else was being played by Big Smoke and Ryder, who were working with Officer Tenpenny to weaken the gang for who knows how long. Yes, it can be argued that as the leader of the Grove, maybe Sweet should have been more skeptical of what his two highest ranking associates were doing while he wasn't looking, especially in regards to Smoke here, seeing as how his move out to Idlewood and dealings with groups like the Russians were pretty suspicious in retrospect. But to be fair, it's not like CJ picked up on this either. When our protagonist made his return to Los Santos, he was more than happy to see his old friends and hang out with them just like old times. And at no point during these interactions with Smoke and Ryder did CJ ever feel like something treacherous was afoot. Granted, CJ didn't have nearly as much time to figure out what his friends were up to as Sweet had, but if they were able to hide their workings with Crash from CJ as well as they did, then I don't think it should be any shock that Sweet was never privy to their plans. And let's remember as well that in the end, it wasn't even CJ who uncovered Smoke and Ryder's betrayal, but rather Caesar, an outsider to GSF. So if anyone wants to use Sweet's ignorance to his friend's treachery as a reason to dislike him, then I think you have to feel the same about CJ. But speaking of Caesar and Sweet's ignorance, Let's talk racism. More specifically, let's talk about the racism that Sweet exhibits in the mission Caesar Villalpando. In the opening cutscene, Sweet tries to talk Kendall out of going into Azteca territory to see her Latino boyfriend. But he does so by making claims like, and I quote, "some things ain't meant to happen," before referring to the idea of their child being named something like Leroy Lopez. Which, I'm not gonna lie, that's actually a pretty badass name. Like, just imagine getting jumped by a dude named Leroy Lopez. I don't think you're surviving that shit, dude. Anyway, it's undeniable that the way Sweet goes about things in this mission is just purely wrong. But as he elaborates to Carl after Kendall leaves, he just doesn't want to lose yet another family member after just losing his mother and losing his brother a few years ago. While we know now that Kendall's relationship with Caesar ended up being the best thing that could have happened to the Johnson family considering how valuable he ends up being throughout the rest of the story, if we look at things from Sweet's perspective, he doesn't hate the idea of his sister dating a Mexican, he's just afraid of the prospect of her getting involved with rival gangsters in hostile territories. He's not being racist in saying she looks like a hooker out of malice. He's looking out for his little sister, and while yes, he goes about it in the wrong way, his heart is clearly in the right place, which is why he asks CJ to protect her before they lose yet another sibling. One last criticism Sweet's detractors love to hate on him for is his lack of work out in the field. Now, while it may be true that Sweet isn't shy about sending CJ, Smoke, and Ryder out to handle things on the streets, it's unfair to say he never does his fair share of the dirty work. In missions like Drive-By and House Party, Sweet is right there alongside us and the rest of the team on the front lines, helping us take down the Ballas. In Los Sepulcros, we follow Sweet's lead as we help execute his plan to eliminate a Balla's leader, and I know you could easily claim that CJ's always the one carrying Sweet in all these missions, but if we look at Sweet's girl, while he needed our help in surviving his opposition, it's worth pointing out that he was outgunned and outnumbered by at least 6 rival gangsters and was holding his own with just a pistol until CJ showed up. Additionally, as I already mentioned in tagging up turf, Sweet opts to go with us to perform the job he assigned. I also want to point out that in the very first mission of the game, Sweet takes on the sacrifice of leading the attacking Ballas away from the rest of the group so that we can make it back to the Grove more safely. Then, in reuniting the families, Sweet elects himself as the Grove's representative in the meeting between all the sets, further exhibiting his leadership as he takes on the task of trying to reunite the rest of the family sets. Finally, in the Green Saber, Sweet valiantly leads GSF into a firefight where he gets wounded while CJ is out with Caesar. Then, after our protagonist arrives, Sweet knows this isn't a winnable fight and tells his brother to leave him behind and save himself, showing yet again that he's willing to sacrifice himself for CJ's safety in the same place as he did last time. And that's just the stuff that happens in the first arc of the game. We'll talk about Sweet's role in the Return to Los Santos in a bit, but while knowing about all those missions I just brought up where Sweet actively exhibits either his valiant leadership or courageous combat ability, I don't think it's truly fair to make the claim that he just sits on his ass back at the house while he lets CJ and the gang take care of business. That all being said though, I acknowledge that nobody's perfect and it's rare that we even get a good fictional character that is too. So there's gonna be some valid criticisms of Sweet that even I can't play devil's advocate for, like when he went into the hostile Seville Boulevard territory to fuck some girl, or when he was about to succumb to crack right after getting out of prison. But I think that the rest of these criticisms that I've gone over so far have been blown way out of proportion. I know Sweet was an asshole to CJ when our protagonist first came back to Los Santos, but cut the man some slack, he was grieving the loss of his damn mother. And to his credit, he got over his bitterness fairly quickly as he'd already warmed back up to CJ in our very next mission with him. And by the end of this first arc of the story, we could easily see just how much the brothers' love had blossomed. Additionally, while our big brother may have had other moments where his words told a story that he was a dick to his family, he's repeatedly proved with his actions that his primary interest has always been to protect his family. And you can question his fieldwork or his leadership all you want, but if you actually look at just how many missions he plays a major role in, you'd be lying to yourself if you believed he was just a lazy bum. However, we've still yet to talk about the major event that takes place near the end of the game that I believe is what truly causes many players to disdain Sweet as much as they do, and that's when Sweet is released from prison. Now, if I were to take an educated guess, I'd have to imagine this little speech Sweet gives to CJ in the mission Homecoming is one of the biggest reasons why so many people dislike him. At the start of this cutscene, CJ is excited to see his brother walk as a free man, and he can't wait to show him everything that he's accomplished en route to earning his brother's freedom. But when Sweet hears him talk about everything that he's done for himself, he throws a fit and insists that we get back to the Grove and check on the gang. CJ retorts that Grove Street is fucked and implores his brother to come back to the mansion with him, but Sweet stubbornly doubles down as he demands to know what CJ's done for the Grove since he'd been locked up. At this point, CJ gets fed up and tells him that Grove Street held him back, and ever since he went into exile, he's been steadily building up his empire and making something of himself. Sweet then tells him that he's talking just like Big Smoke, which finally defeats our protagonist as he reluctantly agrees to take him back to the hood. When we arrive, we see the place is overrun with ballas, drug dealers, and crackheads, and while CJ wants to abandon the ship, Sweet insists that we clear up the place and restore Grove Street's headquarters. After we do so, CJ again tries to get Sweet to come back with him to Mad Dog's mansion, but our stubborn stubborn brother chooses to remain in the Grove. Now this is the mission that I believe truly polarizes Sweet's character, and I personally think that your sentiment towards him overall is likely determined by how you view him here. It seems like many people look at Sweet in this mission, hear his words, hear how he talks to CJ, and assume that he just wants to drag our protagonist back into the impoverished lifestyle he'd escaped because that's the only lifestyle he knows and he doesn't want to let it go. And I can absolutely see the logic in this. If your life is in a rough spot, but you're able to break free from whatever's holding you back and build yourself a much better life, there's no reason why you should be vilified for doing what's best for you, because nobody is going to look out for you the way that you will. So for Sweet to compare CJ to one of the story's main antagonists for building a better life for himself, Caesar and Kendall, and even Sweet, that's complete bullshit. However, let's take a look at things from Sweet's perspective here. As I said, if you, an average person, are able to escape the shackles of hardship to earn a life that's worth living, that's an accomplishment that nobody should be able to shame you for. But the difference here is that CJ and Sweet aren't average people. Sweet is the leader of Grove Street families, and it's safe to assume that CJ is a co-leader of some sort. So when the two are forced to leave Los Santos for their respective reasons, GSF effectively falls since his leaders are forced to abandon the gang. That's not fair to the loyal gangsters who counted on Sweet and CJ to lead GSF to prosperity, to just leave them to become baseheads and totally dependent on the Ballas. To sort of equate this to a real-world scenario, those of you who follow professional wrestling might recall a story from a few years ago where the Young Bucks AEW contracts were set to expire, so they were teasing a move to the WWE to raise their stock and leverage better contracts for themselves. Now, this is all well and good for the average wrestler to play these kinds of games. Randy Orton did the same when his WWE contract was nearing its end, and Jade Cargill full-on pulled that trigger when she jumped ship to the WWE. But as Jim Cornette, a highly intelligent and respected figure in the wrestling industry, pointed out on his podcast, the thing that makes the Young Bucks case so different is the fact that they are executive vice presidents of AEW, not just regular wrestlers. So if they were to abandon their post in the company they helped create to further their own careers, they potentially could have fucked over an entire company's worth of talent and greatly diminished the chances of any of them becoming big stars one day. And before any of the wrestling tribalists flood the comment section, I'm not saying that the Young Bucks leaving AEW would have for sure killed the company. Just look at Cody Rhodes' departure if you needed proof that them losing an EVP isn't exactly the end of the world. But it definitely could have negatively rocked the entire company. The point is that when Sweet tells CJ that he needs to return to the hood, it's not because he's just incapable of comprehending life outside of it and wants to drag everybody he knows back into it. It's because he's the leader of the Grove, and he knows it's his duty to protect the families, just as he's the patriarch of the Johnsons and knows it's his duty to protect his family. But he also knows that if he couldn't revive GSF on his own at the beginning of the story, he won't be able to revive it on his own now, which is why he pesters CJ so hard to join him on this mission. Now, I truly believe that Sweet's unwillingness to abandon the people that looked up to him is very admirable, and the fact that he gets so much hate for this is so confusing to me. Maybe it is just the fact that he pretty much forces CJ to join him on this crusade, but I think Sweet makes it clear that he's fine with his brother making it big, as long as he doesn't forget about those who helped him get there. I don't think he'd be willing to go anywhere near the mansion like he does in Riot if that weren't the case. It also doesn't make sense to me that Sweet gets this hate for asking CJ to help him restore the Grove, but Caesar doesn't get any for asking CJ to help him restore the Vario. And don't get me wrong, I love Caesar. I'm not saying Caesar deserves any hate whatsoever. I'm just saying that it feels like a double standard. At the end of the day, Sweet just wants to lead the men who trusted him to lead them, and he consistently shows his willingness to protect them as he goes along with us to take back several gang territories and pledges to lock down the Grove from the rioters when chaos erupts in the streets. I also understand that a lot of people may feel like he doesn't really do anything to help GSF at the end of the game, and just forces CJ back into the hood so he can do it for him. And I just want to point out that that's not the case at all. As I just said, in the missions Homecoming, Beat Down on Beat Up, and Grow for Life, Sweet is right there with CJ, fighting alongside him as the Johnson boys expand Grove Street again. But then, just before the last mission of the game, Sweet effectively tells us that we need to spread the Grove's influence throughout Los Santos if they're gonna get the info they need to track down Big Smoke, leaving CJ to conquer more territories by himself. Now I understand why you might think Sweet's just sitting on his ass at home at this point while CJ does all the heavy lifting, but in this phone call, he informs us that the game plan is for our protagonist to loudly intimidate our rival gangs, while our brother quietly interrogates them. And considering he's presumably got his hands full with securing Grove Street against the rioters as well, I'd argue that in the grand scheme, he's pulling a lot more weight than you realize. Finally, in the mission End of the Line, we all know that Sweet waits in the car while our protagonist handled business. But keep in mind that this was CJ's call. Carl is the one who decided to do this alone. And while I do think Sweet should have put up more of a fight here to go with his brother, it's not like he volunteered to stay back like a coward. Granted, of all the times he could have let CJ have his way, this probably wasn't the greatest. But it's not completely fair to fault Sweet for honoring his brother's wishes. Later on, after Smoke's dead and we escape the crack fortress, Sweet makes the questionable decision to jump on the back of Tenpenny's fire truck and get himself stuck there, which shows a level of bravery that I can certainly respect from him, but that's far outshined here by his level of stupidity that nearly causes his death. Regardless of that though, he quickly redeems himself when he takes the wheel after you catch him, and he then successfully navigates his way through all of our attackers as we chase down Tenpenny. Finally, after the chase ends and Tenpenny dies on the street, Sweet wisely dissuades CJ from putting a bullet into the fallen officer, knowing that it could create evidence of their involvement in his death, showing us one last time that Sweet is more intelligent than most will give him credit for. So with everything now in mind, let's go ahead and make our final judgment on the character of Sweet Johnson. Throughout this video, I've talked about most of Sweet's appearances in the story of San Andreas, and I've gone into detail about how many of these appearances have unfairly left a bad taste in the mouths of plenty of San Andreas' players over the years. And I used to be one of these people who looked at Sweet and only saw him for his faults. But as I dug deeper into his character and started to understand more about his perspective, I came to realize that he's nowhere near the devil that he's been made out to be. In actuality, I firmly believe that he's been heavily misunderstood. While there's certainly times when Sweet says the wrong things or treats people the wrong way, he makes it clear that he doesn't do these things out of malice and that he almost always has valid reasons. When he acts like an asshole towards CJ at the start of the game, it becomes obvious that he's dealing with the grief of losing his mother, and his mixed feelings over seeing Carl after so long are definitely not mixing well with that grief. So he ends up taking that anger out on his little brother. But that anger subsides very quickly when his love for his brother overpowers it. And from then on, the two brothers share a bond that's unbreakable. When he makes his racist remarks towards Kendall about Caesar, he only does so in an effort to deter his sister from seeing a potentially dangerous man he doesn't know. The reality of it is he doesn't care if she's dating a Mexican, he cares that she's dating a rival gangster, and is as worried for her safety in this case as he'd be if she were dating a Bala. Yes, this is another case of him going at things the wrong way, but the bottom line is that he does what he does in the scene to protect his little sister. Could Sweet have been a better leader? Sure, he could have picked up on Big Smoke and Ryder's deception early on and snuffed them out before they could do any real damage. But it's not like anybody else, not even his right-hand man CJ, discovered their treachery without the help of an outside party, so it's unfair to put the blame entirely on him. But even if you want to and won't be stopped from doing so, you have to acknowledge that Sweet did everything else in his power to strengthen the gang he cared about. And while most of the gang's success can be attributed to CJ's hard work, you can't deny that Sweet worked as hard as he could alongside CJ, be it by fighting in the field or planning at home, to boost the Grove into becoming the powerhouse it once was. So could Sweet have been a better leader? Sure, there's always room for improvement, but he's proven to me that he already is a damn good leader. Is Sweet perfect? No, he's absolutely had his moments of weakness that would have ended him had his brother not been there for him. But who the hell is perfect? Sweet played the best that he could with the cards that he was dealt, and while it's clear that CJ was the trump card of his hand that he couldn't have won without, I don't believe it's fair to vilify him because his best wouldn't have been good enough without the help of his brother. So please, just quit it with the Sweet slander, and let my boy live his life in peace. He's fucking earned it.
Welcome to San Andreas, I'm CJ from
I can understand why people may feel the way that they do about Sweet if they don't know the story all too well. And while I'm not claiming to know this story better than speedrunners of the game like Hugo1, who have played through the game an unfathomable amount of times, I'm confident enough in my own research to hold the opinion that Sweet isn't as bad as everyone says he is. And that's a hill I'm willing to die on, so go on. Blast me in the comments for not believing Sweet is worse than Hitler. I've dealt with enough hate comments regarding GTA 3 over the past year, so I promise I can handle it. But speaking of comments, how'd you like the video? It's been a minute since I've talked about San Andreas, as I've been pretty preoccupied with GTA 4 as of late. But this topic is something that's been on my mind for a while now, and I'm always looking for a good excuse to talk about my favorite video game of all time. So I figured I'd go ahead and voice my opinion on Sweet at the risk of being cancelled for potentially disagreeing with the majority. But what did you think? Do you agree with me that Sweet gets more hate than he deserves, or do you think his reputation is justified? Tell me down below, and while you're there, feel free to give me some other controversial topics you'd like me to cover. I'm always one to kick the hornet's nest, so if you've got an idea you want to share with me, then go for it. But also, what did you think of the video itself? Did you enjoy it? If so, then hit the like button and leave a comment telling me why. Or if you didn't like it, then hit the like button anyway, and lie in the comments that you absolutely love the video. If you want to see more potentially controversial takes like this, or if you just want to see more content regarding Grand Theft Auto, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss when I post my next video. If you've got some friends who also enjoy San Andreas that you want to convince to like Sweet, feel free to share this video with them. Lastly, if you'd like to support me and my channel, you can become a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Anyway, with all that plugging out of the way, I think I'm done here. Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope each of you have a blessed day. This is your boy Dog6, and I am signing off. I'll catch you guys later.
He ain't worthy of that, the controversy is back. Get out the Kool-Aid, stir me your back. See, I prefer to relax, but I can't and God knows it. Gotta stay raw with the flow that I'm diagnosed with. Oh shit, niggas keep fucking with my emotions. Maybe that's the reason I suffer from psychosis. Shocking is high voltage, fuck it, my life's hopeless. So I had to make sure I killed it when I wrote this.
Murderous mind state, can't keep my nine straight. Sipping on this Hennessy, waiting for the time to break. Show up